26. Stage 1. Rehearsals. July 7th, 2018. A cave dive rescue with this many people has never been attempted before. A cave dive rescue with children has never been attempted before. Just a few weeks ago, the world's expert in cave diving rescues would have deemed the whole thing impossible. At Tam Luang Nang Non, the rescue team is going to give the impossible a shot. They have just a short time to get prepared. Any disagreements or misunderstandings that have bubbled up in base camp over the past 2 weeks must be set aside. The rescuers must now become a perfectly synchronized machine, with each person acting as a single gear. If even one person fails to do their job, the entire rescue machine will break down. Planning the diving portion of the rescue is left almost entirely to Rick and John and their comrades. Fellow expert divers Chris Jewell and Jason Mallinson will join them in taking on the grave responsibility of diving the children out of the cave. They will be supported by a skilled team of cave divers from all over the world. Once the rescue begins, 13 divers will be in place beyond Chamber 3, a small but highly trusted team. From the moment that Rick and John begin thinking about diving the boys out of the cave, they decide that there are 2 requirements that must be met before they will agree to participate. The first requirement is to find full face masks that fit the children. On the day that John and Rick located the wild boars, one of the first things they noticed as the boys came down to the water to greet them was how small they were. Finding a mask that will form a good, tight seal around their faces won't be easy. It can't be a typical mask that covers only the eyes and nose. The British divers want a mask that will cover the entire face so that the boys won't need to mess with holding a regulator in their mouths. Air will be constantly piped into the mask, keeping it at positive pressure. This means that if the seal gets bumped or slightly loosened, air will bubble out instead of water rushing in and flooding the mask. Finding the right mask turns out to be a huge challenge. The only masks that seem as though they will work are the kind used by industrial divers and firefighters. In the UK, a small dive shop named Bristol Channel Diving scours its supply and finally locates 2 of this type of mask. The precious items are rushed to the airport in London, with a full police escort leading the way. I and the Get It Done crew call around to find a local child who can try on the masks and make sure they will fit. They find a young boy who gleefully volunteers to skip school to help. When he tries on one of the masks sent from England, it's still too big. It takes some makeshift last-minute engineering, including using cut-up pieces of neoprene from a wetsuit to finally get the masks to fit. With this mask design, the wild boars can just inhale and exhale normally, and won't have to think about their breathing at all. This is good because John and Rick's second requirement is that the boys be completely knocked out for the entire thing. Knowing that panic is a diver's worst enemy, they have asked their friend Dr. Richard Harris to fly in from Adelaide, Australia to join the dive team. In addition to being a top-tier cave diver, Dr. Harris is also a practicing anesthesiologist. His job back home is to give patients drugs that dull their pain and sedate them, put them to sleep, before they undergo surgery. It's a job that requires him to be incredibly level-headed and cool under pressure. It's no surprise that those qualities also make him an excellent sump diver. He flies to northern Thailand with his longtime diving partner, veterinarian Craig Challen, another record-setting cave diver. Dr. Harris's first thought on hearing the plan to sedate the wild boars is, no way. Sedation is out of the question, he tells Rick. It's impossible to do that safely and dive kids out in an anesthetized state. He sedates children on a regular basis at his medical practice, where he has a reputation for being especially great with kids. But in those circumstances, the children are surrounded by other doctors and nurses. They have easy access to other drugs and medical equipment. It's much different from sedating kids in a dark, wet cave, far from emergency medical help if something goes wrong. But once Dr. Harris arrives on site and is fully briefed on the situation, he reluctantly agrees that having the boys sleep through the rescue is the safest way to get them out. With doubt weighing heavily on his mind, he begins calling other doctors to discuss which medicines to give the boys. The boys' parents aren't told that their children will be sedated. In fact, this part of the mission isn't made public in Thailand at all while the rescue is taking place. Perhaps the Thai authorities worry how it sounds. The boys will be put to sleep and then dragged through the water? What if they never wake up? It sounds worrisome and dangerous to use sedation for something other than surgery. When the rescue begins, even some of the people working inside the cave will not be told that the boys are medicated. The sedation and the diving will be the most dangerous part of the rescue for the boys because it puts them at immediate risk for drowning. But there is also a whole host of other things to plan for if the rescue is to be successful. such as figuring out how to get the boys over the dry sections of the cave. Major Hodges suggests they use one of his favorite problem-solving techniques. His Air Force team will huddle together and sketch out a plan. The Thai SEALs will design their own plan separately, and then the two teams will get together and compare. They will take the best ideas from each group to create the best possible plan. With the details refined, the rescuers divide the route into 9 separate chambers. At the start of each dive, Dr. Harris will give the wild boars their sedative in Chamber 9. The British divers, Rick, John, Chris, and Jason, will then dive the children through the sumps between Chambers 9 and 3. Along the way, support divers will be stationed in the dry sections to help swap out air tanks, give medical checks, and if necessary, finish diving the boys out if the 4 other divers run into any problems. Everyone else, including the Thai SEALs and the US Air Force, will be waiting in Chamber 3 to finish taking the boys to the exit. Once the overall plan is agreed upon, Sergeant Derek Anderson begins leading the rescue team in rehearsals. He clears a large area in the Tam Luang parking lot and stages out a mini version of the cave, using plastic chairs to represent the chambers. He places water bottles on the ground to represent the air cylinders that will be staged at points along the route. He walks through the cave, marking where they need more cylinders or rescue stretchers and how many people will need to carry them. Some in base camp eye him strangely, but this type of rehearsal is standard procedure for Sergeant Anderson and his squadron. The rescue divers are rehearsing as well. They meet up at an indoor swimming pool with local children who have, again, gleefully, volunteered to miss school to help the rescue. The children try on the small wetsuits, face masks, and gear, and the divers practice the best way to tow their small bodies underwater. As the dive team makes its preparations, Colonel Singh Hanat and Tanet are strengthening their water management efforts. As Governor Norongsak says at a press conference, "We are in a war against the water. All the pumping operations at Sai Tong must be maintained at full power. The diversion structures must be strengthened and repaired. If even one pump breaks down or one diversion structure fails, it could jeopardize the whole mission." When Tanet is not with the water diversion team on the mountain, he is bent over his laptop, poring through the data he has collected over the past week. He is looking for patterns in the rainfall. Tanet knows that their water control operations have been successful over the past few days in part because they haven't had much rain. He wants to figure out how much rainfall the cave can take on before the flooding inside overwhelms the pumps. After many calls to nearby weather stations and hours spent making graphs of the data, Tanet calculates that they can withstand 15 millimeters, a little over half an inch, of rain. Anything more than that, and the cave will start flooding again. If this happens when the divers are already inside the cave, they could get trapped themselves. Rain is definitely in the forecast, but it's impossible to say how much. Tanet is a scientific person who likes to control every detail of a project as much as possible. But when it comes to the weather, the only thing he can do is hope. Practice makes perfect. Every astronaut, firefighter, pilot, and soldier will attest that rehearsing is a vital part of being successful in a crisis. We often hear incredible stories of pilots landing planes under emergency conditions, or military units carrying out incredible feats of bravery under tremendous stress, and we marvel at the courage and quick reaction times of the heroes. What we hear less of is how those heroes prepared both their bodies and their minds to be able to respond in those life or death situations. The first time you entered your school building and had to find your classroom, you probably felt a little overwhelmed. You had to take in a lot of new information at once and figure out what was important, which hall your classroom was in, and what was not. How many photos were stapled onto the bulletin board? By now, you probably walk to class every day without even thinking about it. You can even talk with friends while you do it and high-five your librarian along the way. Your body and your mind have practiced your route enough times that it's automatic. The front section of your brain is dedicated to learning. When you are put into a strange situation, your brain's front section takes in new information, notices details, and decides which of those details are important and which ones don't matter. It creates a model and stores it in a different section of your brain. Anytime you need to act fast, your brain pulls up that model from storage. This is why flight attendants walk passengers through emergency procedures and why schools practice fire drills. It's why Sergeant Anderson has the rescuers pacing across a parking lot, pretending that plastic water bottles are scuba tanks. It's why Rick and John run through mental rehearsals before every dive. Rehearsals put a plan of action into your body's muscle memory and into your brain's back compartments. That way you don't need to stop and think about what you're supposed to do. You can just do it. Back at Tamluang, SEALs clear the first 3 chambers of any unnecessary equipment. A green tarp is wrapped across the fence outside the entrance so that no one can see inside. The hundreds of journalists and camera crews are moved away from the cave, across the street, and the roads are cleared. Even though the rescue team has no idea if they will be bringing out living survivors or not, they order 1 ambulance for every child to wait on standby. Low, heavy clouds begin to drift closer to the Nangnon Mountains. Rescuers keep looking up nervously. They need the rain to hold off for just a couple more days. As night falls on July 7th, the time for rehearsals is over. In the morning, the rescue will begin.